Welcome to Law Talk Today, a series devoted to bringing you informative and educational programs focused on issues of law, government, and community. Hello and welcome to Law Talk Today. I'm Dan Agatino, your host. Joining us in studio today is Rachel Alexander of Alexander Mediation Group. Thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
We wanted to talk a little bit today about mediation. The audience of our program is interested in legal topics, and mediation is part of the law. But it's a different part of the law. It's not like going before a judge. Tell us about it.
Mediation is among several alternative dispute resolution tactics. So there's, of course, what we think of first is going before a judge, which is, usually litigation and trial, we go before a judge. There's also something called arbitration, where people can, instead of having a whole litigation process, they can go before an arbitrator, who often is a retired judge, and that arbitrator will then make the determination. That the arbitrator will hear evidence from both sides, will hear sort of a case from both sides, but it's a little bit more, it's more affordable, and it's more, something else. It's more
accessible. It's
less
more
intense. Accessible. It's less intense, and it's more sort of low key, I want to say, than going before a judge. Then we have mediation, and mediation is the mediator, and this I feel like is an important distinction, because often people will say, well, aren't you going to decide? I thought you'd hear us and decide. No, that's an arbitrator. A mediator does not decide. A mediator helps the two parties, helps facilitate two parties in a negotiation. So my task as a mediator is I work with husbands and wives. I work with both of them at the same time, sitting around a table with me. And my job is to help them hear one another, help them communicate, and really help identify what the issues are that need problem solving and that need to be discussed. And then it's really going to be between the two of them, with my assistance, that we come up with an agreement that will be workable.
When you say you work with husbands and wives, do you work with husbands and wives who no longer wish to be husbands and wives? Correct.
I work with usually when clients come to me, they either are at such an impasse that they're not sure what their options are, and if they can, maybe there's a remote chance they could stay together, and we're going to identify that as well. Oftentimes they're at a place where they've determined they want a divorce, and they maybe understand that mediation might be less expensive and just a gentler approach, more affable kind of way to go forward.
Let's do a hypothetical. So I'm married, I come to you, and we've decided we're at an impasse, we're going our separate ways. And now there are a host of issues because we have children and we have assets. And then there are assets that were brought in before the marriage, but they're assets that were gained as part and parcel of the marriage. And I'm saying, well, I built my business, and you stood home and took care of the kids. Why should you get half my business? And then the other side is, well, you wouldn't have been able to go do that if I didn't stay home and you came home and there was food on the table, and all of this is quite typical.
Yes, yes. People come in with all kinds of issues. Sometimes people will say, well, these issues are so complex, or we have all of these premarital funds and premarital assets, and then we were married, but the whole time I was saying I wanted her to get a job, and the whole time I was saying I wanted him to stop gambling. And so I said, right, this is marriage, and now let's come here. Just because the issues are complex, as long as we have two parties who are willing to mediate, because it's a voluntary process, as long as we have that, we can mediate pretty much anything. And all of those issues, all the issues that get resolved with two attorneys in an adversarial process get resolved in mediation. It's just often streamlined, it's conversational, and it can be more creative, because we're going to talk about, look, it sounds like you feel more entitled to, a greater share of the financial assets of the marriage. So we'll talk about what the law has to say about that. We'll talk about, what the wife has to say about that if it's the husband. And we'll see, how do we apply equitable distribution and the concept of equitable distribution once we have the nuances of everybody's interests and opinions about what would be fair.
How do you personally know what the law says about it? Are you an attorney?
I'm an attorney.
So you've chosen that your practice is not going to be in front of judges, it's not going to be in court, but you're going to serve as a mediator who is well informed of, if you don't do this with me and you go before a judge, here's some rules that you're going to be bound by.
Correct, correct. So I am, of course, informed by the law, and personally, I have a background in some social work and a sort of therapeutic background, so that comes into play a lot in terms of working with people and trying to help people be in a place where often when people are going through a divorce or even contemplating a divorce, their level of functionality is sort of dictated by the reptilian brain. They're not at their best. They're not at their, you know, like they just came off of a plane from Arizona, as I just did, you might know. So anyway, but they might be, you know, really not thinking clearly, not in a good place. And part of my job is to work with them to help identify what's causing them fear, allay some of the fear, get us into sort of a calmer waters so we can proceed, you know, in a way that's going to be in their best interest, in their children's best interest, so they can make really thoughtful, grounded decisions. So that's part of
When you say
do.
best interest, you're using the plural, and you say their best interest. But if we're talking about a zero-sum game, if it's one up, it means someone else has to be down.
Right.
Do you perceive that it doesn't work that way?
I perceive that it doesn't work that way. I feel what I love about mediation, and probably why I went this way as opposed to into litigation, it's an entirely different paradigm. The paradigm is much more that this is a family. When you have a winner and a loser in a family, you have all losers. If you have a group and you're all on the same ship, I use this analogy a lot with my families I work with. If you're all on a ship and somebody wants the best part of the ship and wants the other person's part of the ship full of holes and maybe with a giant octopus coming around the ends of it or something and sinking fast, and that's the same ship, and it's going to have effect. Even if somebody else is in the captain's quarters and has the loveliest part of the ship, that part of the ship is still attached, and it's going to be problematic.
So are there instances when there are people who say, I don't care about the other side of the ship, even if it means I'm going down, I know I'm taking him with me?
Yes, there are people like that in the mafia. No, there are people like that, yes. You have to cut that again, sorry, because now I've offended everybody. But there are people like that, and they're very, very challenging to mediate with. If somebody is, it's like mediating with the terrorist. If somebody's hell-bent on their own self-destruction and they want to take you out with them, yes, it's difficult. Now, if you can find that there still are common interests, because there are people who say, I don't care about me, I don't care about my wife, but I do care about my son and what this is going to do to him. If there is that interest, then we look at that and we talk about it and we identify what needs to happen with you and your wife here so that we can be protective of your son. Because do you want to be punishing him? Are you willing to take him out with the rest of the family? And if the answer is no, we can work with that. When I have clients, particularly when there are no children, when they just say, I hate him, he can drop dead right here and I'll harvest his organs. When I have clients like that, that's also challenging. But when there are no children, we then try to identify what are the interests, what needs to be done to get these people apart. That being apart and having probably as little contact going forward, at least for a period of time until things really settle, is probably what's going to be in their best interest. And so I try to help them expedite that without them having to spend tens of thousands of dollars to come up with the exact same result they can come up with working with me.
Drop dead and I will harvest his organs here before you. That's great anger.
That's great anger.
Do you
no
deal
anesthesia.
with that sort of anger?
I do.
And if you do, let's ask this question. The people who come before you are married. They presumably got married because they were in love with each other. And so does it ever come into your practice to say, I want you to conjure in your mind the day you walked up the aisle, gazed adoringly into each other's eyes, and said, I do? Is it something where you try and say, let's take not the moment you're in now, but the totality of your relationship, take some pausing moments and reflect that you may hate each other now, but you didn't get there overnight. You didn't wake up the day after your marriage and be like, oh, you know what? I hate you.
Right. So the way that I go about that would not be to say, remember your wedding day, because not knowing enough, not knowing what might be really triggering and really upsetting, it might be that somebody was 4 months pregnant and that's why, and somebody else was holding a shotgun and that is why we had our wedding day. It might be that no, I never felt in love. I felt like this was my only option and I've been guilty and remorseful ever since. So I don't take them back to specifics that would be sort of maybe universal, would make sense, but from my standpoint with more of a psychological interest and angle, I wouldn't take them there. But I might say, what works between you? Now, is there anything that works? However minute, well, you know what, he always pours me coffee in the morning. It's always waiting for me when I come down. Fine, that works. Let's talk about why that works. What else maybe is working in the relationship, and how can we, because what we're going to want to do, even if you're divorced and live on opposite ends of the state, what we're going to want to do is find what works and how to augment what is working and building from there. And in social work, it's called like strength focusing or strength training rather than pathologizing, because you can have two people talk forever about what's wrong. Whether they're married or not, people love to talk about what's awful. But to talk about what's work and even to ask certain questions like that and help them start thinking about, she's a really good mom. You know, she spent all of our money and we're living in one of those boxes that kids' toys come in for Christmas, but she is a good mom. And talking about what does work, however minor it seems, we want to start shedding the light on that and kind of nourishing those things so that then the people can have more to work with, however the relationship will go.
Let's talk about your background, because you keep referring to, well, social workers refer to it as this, and I have a background in psychology. And are you a psychologist?
I'm not a psychologist. I'm still just a lawyer. But I'm not a psychologist, but my background, I did about a year of school at in social work school at Columbia, and I did a field placement there for 1 semester at the Adolescent Day Hospital at Bellevue. So I feel a little more equipped than I maybe would care to be to deal with these things. But also my training, my interests, and a lot of what I sort of on my free time, you know, kind of research and am invested in is how to help people relate, how to help people get through crisis. And I think a big difference in mediation and with families is when you have a family go through an adversarial process, I liken it to going through a meat grinder. It's not the system.
That's pleasant.
I know, and also remember the harvested organs. But it's unpleasant. That's the point. And it's really not. It's not made for families. The system isn't really made to help families be more nurturing to their children, be more supportive of one another, and help, you know, sort of the nuanced needs of their children. That's not how it's set up. It's really set up to make enemies out of the people, because that's sort of, I think, how our system is, to help the truth come out. We want an adversarial system. There's logic to it. With a family, the more adversarial the people are, particularly when they're children, the more harm gets done to everybody involved. And even if the children, you can say, well, my daughter's never in the room when we're yelling and screaming. When you have an environment with that parents are yelling and screaming, or you have an environment where the father is rolling his eyes at the mother, or the mother is speaking under her breath to the daughter about the father, that is not okay at all. That is quite damaging, and I say it's really probably on the sliding scale of abuse. Children are so closely identified with their parents that when they're if one of their parents is being disparaged by the other, it can create a lot of self-loathing in the child over time, a lot of distrust, attachment issues, a lot of conflicting feelings that children, even older children, are really not equipped to deal with. And it's not healthy for their development. So when we think about being able to kind of sit down and come to the table, mediate, work out what is going to keep the family as intact as possible, because that doesn't mean they stay married. It means that they might divorce. But for these children, that's the mom and that's the dad, or or whoever the partners are. And for that child to be able to come home from visiting with dad and say, I had a really good time, and not send the mom into tears, for example, or say, Mom just got me these cool boots, and have the dad not call mom screaming about what did she just spend money on. For the child to be able to navigate through a calm, sort of loving, environment, even if the people don't love each other in the way husband and wife do, if they can have some kind of the presence of lovingness for the benefit of their child or children, then you can have a familial system that can be quite workable instead of that broken family or that damaged, you know, home, which is always going to lead to a child being messed up. We can have a quite intact system and a quite intact home life that's been reorganized, and that's how I try to approach it.
In all of this, you use the word crisis, and I remember in my studies there was a textbook that referred to a crisis in these terms. It was a great story of, imagine that you're going for an interview and you wake up late. The crisis right now is you're not going to be there on time. You're looking for a parking space because this is an important job interview for you, and you finally find one that's far away from the building. You can't find a quarter, not a little worried about getting a ticket, but you park. You get out of the car, go on the sidewalk, and suddenly it starts raining. You're now not worried about getting a ticket. You're not worried about being late. You're worried about showing up for this interview looking like it's really a schlep. Then what happens is you have yourself walking under an awning, maybe a deli or something like that. You just step aside and I got to get dry, I can't get wet. And the door opens, a Rottweiler comes to chase you. And you run, you don't care about being late, you don't care about getting wet, you don't care about the Rottweiler's now chasing you. You just are running down the street away from this Rottweiler, hit a woman who has a baby carriage goes in front of a bus, and now you go to save the baby. You don't care about the Rottweiler, you don't care about being wet, you don't, and you see what I'm saying, it just builds and builds and builds. And when you talk about crisis in families, it's always like that. It's never that, well, he got up late. It always turns to, well, he got up late, but then he forgot that it was raining. Well, you forgot it was raining, that we were going to get a ticket in the car. You forgot about the Rottweiler. Is that, A, correct, that there's this many streams flowing into this river? And if so, how do you possibly deal with that?
So I'm not 100%, I'm captivated by your analogy because it was very illustrative. Is that a word?
That is a word.
Okay.
We'll use that.
But I'm not, this is what I'm going to take from it, and steer me back if I'm incorrect. Everybody has everything going on at once. A divorce, the threat of a divorce brings all streams, I think, flowing into the river, as you're saying. So it's not just the Rottweiler and the bus and the baby and the bad weather and the interview and the ticket. It's everything. And everything comes onto the table because, you know what, our house, we need to sell it, but there's a lien against it from such and such, or there's a problem with, you know, with the county because we're not supposed to park in a certain place and we keep getting ticketed. Who's going to buy our house? So that, you know, comes in. Wait, I haven't never worked before. I need to go back into the job market. You know, not only does crisis seem to attract crisis, but divorce touches every area of people's lives, from their economics to the home they live in, to how they're going to raise their children, to future relationships they're going to have, to their, you know, family relationships. It's everything. And so part of dealing with that is looking at which is the Rottweiler or the baby carriage. What is the most extreme? What needs to be handled today? Often in my first meetings with people, I'll say, what is of crisis now? What's keeping you up at night? Which a mentor of mine used to ask that question, what's keeping you up at night? And I'll say, if we could resolve one thing today, what would give you sort of the most bang for your buck? What would make you feel the most soothed? And let us then focus at some of the other more mundane things. So sometimes somebody's car's about to be repossessed, or they don't feel safe in the home with the other person. Somebody needs to move out. And so we start to address things that can start to bring the level down so it's more manageable. And when there are so many things on people's plates, as there in almost every situation, there are many, many things on people's plates. We just start to look at them kind of one thing at a time. And also we'll talk a little bit about developing tolerance, that this is really uncomfortable. There are a lot of things. You're perfectly entitled to be uncomfortable. How do you take care of yourself as you're going through this discomfort? What do you need? Maybe you need a babysitter, even if money is tight. Maybe you guys need a babysitter one night a week, or maybe dad takes the kids one night, mom takes the kids another night, and you get those nights to just take a little care of yourself, to let off some steam, or to go get a massage or something, to just start to bring things to manage the situation as it is, so that then we can start building a new situation, which is going to be, you know, much more calmed down, free of crisis, hopefully, and but dealing with the exact issues of the present. And often people are flooded with, but I have this, but if I do this, then I have to get a different car, and if I have a different car, then I have to get a different, and I don't know how to drive, and whatever. And we'll start saying, okay, let's get all the issues down, you know, might be an approach. Let's get all the issues down, but we're just going to talk about what should we talk about now? What's most important, or what would you most like to address now? We're going to get to everything. And part of having a mediator is the mediator helps be the container and the guardian of all the things that need to be discussed and resolved, and can help sort of soothe and help encourage people to self-soothe that these things will get taken care of in our process. And we're going to take, you know, one piece at a time and work through it.
But you seem so detached or neutral or tolerant, which is necessary for your position. You must hear things that trouble you, though. Do you ever get involved to say that that's an inappropriate response, or I've given you these options, you've chosen the worst of all the options, you've twisted even the options that I've provided, I think you're outside the bounds of morality, you're outside the bounds of law. Do you ever say?
That's when I think I started to say law is really helpful, because because there is a process and a system, I can guide by saying, look, first of all, I like my clients to go to review attorneys after we have an agreement drafted.
Certainly.
I like them to have certain things reviewed. So I'm able to say, that might be lovely, that you want to give up alimony even though you have no income and you've been married for 40 years and you have 6 children or whatever. That's a nice sentiment. We can talk about that. When you go to your review attorney, we're going to need to be able to explain to them how we came to that. Are there offsets? Are there offsets in equitable distribution? What's the reasoning behind this? Because what the law would dictate, even though in matrimonial law, as you well know, there's a range. There's a lot of discretion. There's a real range of what can be decided by any judge on a different day. We want to really look at what is going to be reasonable and what's going to fly. And people do come to me with a sense that if something is so out there, sometimes maybe people come in and they think, oh, we'll get away with whatever, here's a nice woman and we're mediating. We're dealing with lawyers. This one who's the less informed or less moneyed spouse will not really know what she's doing, and we'll get some great agreement. That's not going to happen, because part of my oath and part of being an attorney and being a mediator is looking for equity and having some sense of what is going to be fair for both people. The same analogy with the boat. If it's like this, it's not floating anywhere. And it needs to be workable for both people.
Let me ask you this in our closing moments. There are many people, when they're in a crisis, when they're in the kind of situation which you deal with all the time, they're on the inside looking out. And that's very different than being on the outside looking in. And so 5 years down the road, to look back and say, I should have taken that money. That was college education for my son. I missed that house. That was my house. I was raised in that house. My mom and dad built that house, and I got rid of it. But at the time, and I know people in my practice, I would counsel them, stop, what are you doing? Well, you don't know the stress I'm under. I know, but in 3 years, you won't know this stress and you'll lament your decision. How do you strike? How? Do you think about that? Do you personally say, this may seem like an equitable decision and a good agreement now in 2014. It may not be that way for you in 2024. Let's think about the long term. Let's think about the big picture. I don't want you to get caught up in the moment.
Right. A lot of what I talk about with people is really sitting with their decisions, thinking them through. A lot of the freedom of mediation is that we're talking things through. A lot of the benefit of my background is that part of my work is to be really tuned in to what people are saying, both verbally and with their body language and with whether they're coming to the sessions or not. So working with these people, it's very much about one of the things that I underscore repeatedly is I don't want you to have regrets. This is a difficult enough thing to go through. How can we get through this and shore up as much as possible minimize the possibility that you'll have any regrets. So a lot of reality testing, a lot of dialoguing with the clients back and forth. It's not just a fine, I'll do it. It's a what is that reaction about? What does that mean? Really having sort of the courage to dig with people. What is really wanted? You love the house, let's talk about what do you love about the house? What's needed? Can that be replicated in a different home? No? Then how do we talk about trying to get you to stay in the house? Yeah. What's needed? So I really try to look and work with people to identify what they really want, what they believe they want, to explore, is there room that this might change in a year when your situations are somewhat different? Talking this all through, I think, helps so that people don't have to learn by acting it all through and making all the mistakes. We kind of look at things from all different angles. And while I do aim to kind of come from more of an aerial view, I'm also right in there with them at the same time. And that's part of, I think, the dance that good mediators will do, is being right there with the people, not neutral or disinterested, but really on both of their sides, and on the side of the kids and on the side of the whole, at the same time as being able to kind of take a step back and
take a holistic approach.
And look with them. A holistic approach, exactly. That is what I go for.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. This is part one of what I hope to be a multi-series, because mediation is such a rich area of law and practice, and we've only skimmed the surface. Thank you so much. I look forward to your next visit.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to